Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our time to study the gospel of Jesus Christ and of his kingdom. And we're going to continue studying the Gospel of Matthew, beginning in chapter 13. And we left off with the parable of the tares explained, so we're going to pick it up in verse 44. That's Matthew chapter 13, beginning at verse 44. And I figured that while we're waiting, I'll go ahead and give a shout out to all those in YouTube land, specifically Jane. I was asked to make a specific shout out to Jane and Betty and everybody else that's joining us today. Hello, and we're glad that you're here with us. Matthew chapter 13, beginning at verse 44. By way of introduction, we have come through half of this chapter because this chapter is so dense with the bread of life and with the fruits of the Spirit and all these things that it took a little bit of time for us to really go over these and do them some justice. And in fact, the whole book of Matthew, the whole Gospel of Matthew, takes a little bit of time to really kind of dig in because it references a lot of other things and a lot of other things in the Old Testament. And so we try to do justice to a little bit of all of it as we go through. Matthew chapter 13, beginning at verse 44. This is Jesus giving his parables, and he begins this parable saying, "Again, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and hid. And for joy over it, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking beautiful pearls, who, when he had found one pearl of great price, went and sold all that he had and bought it. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet that was cast into the sea and gathered some of every kind, which, when it was full, they drew up to shore, and they sat down and gathered the good into vessels and threw the bad away. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come forth, separate the wicked from among the just, and cast them into the furnace of fire. There will be wailing and gnashing of teeth." Jesus said to them, "Have you understood all these things?" They said to him, "Yes, Lord." Then he said to them, "Therefore every scribe instructed concerning the kingdom of heaven is like a householder who brings out of his treasure things new and old." And I think that's a good place to stop and see if anybody has any thoughts about those particular parables. I would challenge us that I think that many of us have this kingdom mindset. We have this understanding of the kingdom. We have maybe not quite have the pearl of great price, but it's within grasp. And are we willing to sell everything that we have? Are we willing to give up everything in order to attain this treasure in the field or this pearl of great price? Really a challenge that we ought to sit and think about. So does anybody else have anything on that? I would say the parable of the dragnet is valuable to be read with both the parable of the sower and the parable of the wheat and tares. I think it helps to shine a little bit of light onto the meanings of those as well. Yes?
I think it's interesting, I guess, the actions.
Mm-hmm.
Because first it's hid, then it's seeking, and then you're casting. And we first have to hide God in our heart.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have to seek after his knowledge, his wisdom, and growing closer to him. And then we're to gather others.
But you notice that that we're not the ones doing the casting of the dragnet.
Correct.
But we're here to do the harvest
Right.
that God calls. Yes. Yep. We have to be here and ready to sift through the. Anybody ever been on like a shrimp boat or a fishing boat, a sea fishing boat where they cast out a dragnet? Ever been on anything like that or seen that? So whenever, for example, I've been to Charleston and been on a shrimp boat in Charleston, and they go out and they cast those nets out and drag it, and at the end of the day, then they bring it back up, and then there's all kinds of things in there. they're looking for shrimp, but there's crabs and there's other fish and things like that. I know these are all unclean meat, but you understand what I'm talking about, that there's all kinds of different things in that net. And so what the fishermen do is, if they're looking for a particular type of fish, then they'll keep that, and then they'll cast the other stuff back into the sea. So I think that that's definitely like the dragnet that's being talked about here. Some people fish offshore with a casting dragnet that they can cast into the water, and then it has weights on the end of it, and then it falls into the ocean, and then you pull it back in, and you may have some different fish or things in there, and you pick out the stuff that you want, and then you throw the other stuff back that you don't want. So everybody kind of understand that. That's what God is doing. God is looking for a particular type of people. He's calling a particular type of people into his kingdom, and then the other people that are not called into his kingdom initially will get a chance to be called later on. But there's a particular type of person that God wants right now, and another type that he will want later. All right, then we'll continue. Verse 53. Now it came to pass, when Jesus had finished these parables, that he departed from there. When he had come into his own country, he taught them in their synagogue, so that they were astonished and said, "Where did this man get this wisdom and these mighty works? Is this not the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary, and his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas? And his sisters, are they not all with us? Where then did this man get all these things?" So they were offended at him. But Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his own country and in his own house." Now, he did not do many mighty works there because of their unbelief. That's a kind of a key verse there, 58. That faith precedes the works that are done because of faith. So anybody have any thoughts about that? Why a prophet might not have so much honor in his own home country or his own hometown? Because he's not mysterious, that's one thing. You go into another town, nobody knows who you are. You can, tell all these things, and you can preach the word, and you probably be successful because they don't know you. They didn't grow up with you. They didn't go to school with you. They don't know your people. They didn't grow up with all your cousins. You're not related to half the town or 3/4 of the town. You know what I'm saying?
The same familiarity breeds contempt.
Exactly.
Applies here.
I would say that's exactly right. Familiarity breeds contempt, and it definitely applies here. Even though Jesus never did anything, as we know, he was perfectly sinless. He never did anything that would cast a black mark against him. But they still knew him. They knew him as a boy and knew him around town. And that's for a fact. Yes, Tom?
Where it says, "Except in his own country and in his own house,"
Mm-hmm.
where it was offended, brings up a term that says, "Well, who do you think you are?"
Mm-hmm.
Say, and that's kind of, well, okay, have a good life.
Okay. All right.
It'll come back around from somebody else outside of the town, because I'll teach them over there and they'll come back to you.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Very good. All right. So Jesus was rejected in Nazareth, his own hometown. John the Baptist beheaded. Verse 14. And at that time Herod the Tetrarch heard the report about Jesus, and said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He is risen from the dead, and therefore these powers are at work in him." For Herod had laid hold of John, and bound him, and put him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because John had said to him, "It is not lawful for you to have her." And although he wanted to put him to death, he feared the multitude, because they counted him as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday was celebrated, the daughter of Herodias danced before them, and pleased Herod. Therefore he promised with an oath to give her whatever she might ask. So she, having been prompted by her mother, said, "Give me John the Baptist's head here on a platter." And the king was sorry. Nevertheless, because of the oaths and because of those who sat with him, he commanded it be given to her. So he sent and had John beheaded in prison, and his head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, and she brought it to her mother. Then his disciples came and took away the body and buried it, and went and told Jesus. Any thoughts about that?
Why would the mother prompt the daughter to do so?
It's a good question.
Because she wanted to have the affair with Herod, right?
She wanted to be his wife. Or married to him.
So the mother wanted the daughter to be married to Herod?
No, she wanted
the
it
wife
for
herself. For the sake of Herodias, the wife of his brother Philip, because okay, it doesn't actually say that, does it? All right.
Well, it's
Well, it's so that John would stop bothering. He placed a curse on him through Scripture. And the old-timey Old Testament, with her taken up with Herod.
Yeah.
Herodias just hated John the Baptist
Mm-hmm.
because he called out their sin of an unlawful marriage.
Mm-hmm.
So,
There you go.
she would have had him killed earlier if she could have.
Mm-hmm.
Just hated.
And also, Herod was the tetrarch. He was the ruler of this area, right? The Galilee. What do powerful people not like?
Other people tell them.
That, but there's a deeper thing. They don't want their own power challenged. Powerful people do not like to be challenged by other powerful people, and they don't want people coming up from the bottom that are powerful. And John was a very powerful person, whether he counted it power or not. He had a following, and he had people that listened to him, and powerful people don't like that. And you can see that in this country and other countries where maybe they don't like someone threatening their own position of power, where they don't like other powerful people threatening their own position of power. That's basically the history of the whole world in a nutshell, if you really think about it.
That would make sense to what Tripp said, that if he's pointing out
He's pointing out their failings.
Then that actually makes them look weak in the public's eye.
Exactly. And so what could happen to a person who is a powerful person who's made to look weak in the public eye?
Be replaced.
Yeah. Yep. They could be taken care of. But yeah, definitely. A lot going on in that little story. Take a look at. But people were saying about Jesus that he was John the Baptist himself come again in some sense or in some manner. And you know how stories get passed around sometimes. All right, now let's continue on into verse 13. When Jesus heard it, he departed from there by boat to a deserted place by himself. So he heard all these things about John the Baptist being beheaded and people talking about how Jesus might be John the Baptist himself. So when he heard that, he got out of there. But when the multitudes heard it, they followed him on foot from the cities. And when Jesus went out, he saw a great multitude, and he was moved with compassion for them and healed their sick. So people will go to follow Jesus even though they have a false understanding of who Jesus is. This is the same multitude that was talking about how he was a reincarnation of John the Baptist. And they went and followed him anyway, even though he tried to get out of there, even though they didn't really know who he was. But even though they had a false understanding of who he was moved to compassion for them and healed their sick. Verse 15, and when it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is already late. Send the multitudes away, that they may go into the villages and buy themselves food." But Jesus said to them, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "We have only here 5 loaves and 2 fishes." He said, "Bring them here to me." Then he commanded the multitudes to sit down on the grass, and he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, And looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke and gave the loaves to the disciples, and the disciples gave the loaves, or the disciples gave to the multitudes. So they all ate and were filled, and they took up 12 baskets full of the fragments that remained. Now those who had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Now this is the story that's commonly called the feeding of the 5,000, right? Everybody's pretty much familiar with this story. How many Gospels is this story recorded in? It's recorded here, so that's one. It's one of the few stories that's recorded in all four of the Gospels: Mark, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And if you want to go and go back and read them in each one, I'll give you the starting points of each one. Mark, it's in Mark 6, verse 30. Luke chapter 9, verse 10. And John chapter 6, verse 1. And each one gives a little bit of a different details. Now, with this story, I do want to specifically go to Mark's account of this, and we'll see why here in just a minute. Let's go to Mark chapter 6, verse 41. We won't read the whole thing, which I just want to read a key point here. It adds a little bit of detail to Matthew's account. Mark chapter 6. Mark chapter 6. And I'm in Luke. And verse 41. Same story, just a slightly different detail here that gives a little bit of nuance to it. All right, and it says, "And when he had taken the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, same amount, he looked up to heaven, blessed and broke the loaves, and gave them to his disciples to set before them. And the two fish he divided among them all. So they all ate and were filled, and they took up 12 baskets full of fragments of the fish, and now those who had eaten the loaves were about 5,000. So I wanted to show you that, because most of the time when you see depictions of this in movies, what does Jesus do? He lifts up the baskets, prays over them, and then when they come back down, this is especially in the Jesus movie that got sent around 20 or so years ago. When he comes back down with the baskets, there's like 50 fish in the baskets, and then there's 200 loaves of bread in all the baskets, right? Well, what does Mark clearly say happened? He divided 2 fish among them all. So what was the miracle? What was the miracle? What was the miracle? Was it that he lifted them up and then he came back down and there were 50 fish and 100 loaves of bread? No, it was 5 loaves, 2 fish. And the miracle was in the division, that Christ divided it and gave it to each and every one, and they were all able to eat and be filled. The miracle is that everybody was satisfied with so little.
Multiplication too.
Is that what it says? It says he divided it.
Yeah.
He divided it among them. And I want to prove my point. Let's go to John chapter 6. As Tom often says, God is the God of enough, and Satan is the God of never enough. 6, chapter 25, and we're going to read a parable that is, or not a parable, but Jesus describes himself as the bread of life. And this is not recorded in Matthew, Mark, or Luke, but it is recorded here in John, and it's something he talks about after he does this miracle. 6:25. All right. Oh, no? Yeah. 6:25. All right. And when they found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, Rabbi, when did you come here? And Jesus answered them and said, Most assuredly, I say to you, you seek me not because you saw the signs, but because you ate of the loaves and were filled. That's a key phrase. You were filled on so little. I divided it up and you were able to eat it and were filled. Okay? Do not labor for the food which perishes, but for the food which endures to everlasting life, which the Son of Man will give you, because God the Father has set his seal on him. Then they said to him, What shall we do that we may work the works of God? Jesus answered and said to them, This is the work of God, that you believe in him who he sent. Therefore they said to him, What sign will you perform then, that we may see it and believe you? What work will you do? Our fathers ate the manna in the desert. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. Then Jesus said to them, Most assuredly, I say to you, Moses did not give you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Then they said to him, Lord, give us this bread always. See how they're thinking? They're still thinking in the carnal way. They're not thinking in the spiritual. It says, And Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. But I said to you that you have seen me and yet do not believe. All that the Father gives me will come to me, and the one who comes to me I will by no means cast out. For I have come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. This is the will of the Father who sent me, that all of he has given me I should not lose, but should raise it up on the last day. And this is the will of him who sent me, that everyone who sees the Son and believes in him may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up at the last day. The Jews then complained about him because he said, I am the bread which came down from heaven. And they said, Is not this Jesus the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How is it then he says, I have come down from heaven? See, some more of that contempt for the familiar, right? Jesus therefore answered and said to them, Do not murmur among yourselves. No one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I will raise him up at the last day. So nobody can come to Jesus unless God the Father calls them to Jesus Christ. Okay? It is written in the prophets that they shall all be taught by God. Therefore everyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me. Not that anyone has seen the Father, except he who is from God. He has seen the Father. Most assuredly, I say to you, he who believes in me has everlasting life. I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness and are dead. This is the bread which comes down from heaven, that one may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And the bread that I shall give is my flesh, which I shall give for the life of the world. The Jews therefore quarreled among themselves, saying, How can this man give us his flesh to eat? So they're still thinking in that fleshly way, that carnal way. Then Jesus said to them, Most assuredly, I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up the last day. For my flesh is food indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him. As the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so he who feeds on me will live because of me. This is the bread which came down from heaven, not as your fathers ate the manna and are dead. He who eats this bread will live forever. These things he said in the synagogue as he taught in Capernaum. Any thoughts about that? What's Jesus saying there?
Well, he's trying to raise their level of thinking from the physical to the spiritual,
Mm-hmm.
and it's difficult for them.
Hmm.
It is for me.
Well, partially because they were not called. They were not called to that understanding. And we're coming to that because that is a theme in this particular chapter is that unless your eyes have been opened, you will not see. Unless your mind has been opened, you will not understand. Unless your heart has been opened, you will not feel these things. All right. So let's continue back to Matthew.
Can I-
Yeah, go ahead.
When you pointed out about there being two fish,
Mm-hmm.
and I've made a note that a little blessed by God will sustain you. And it reminded me of the lady that just touched the hem of his garment, that there was healing done on something so small.
Mm-hmm. There's another story that we're coming to that will illustrate that as well. Absolutely. That's the case. All right, so let's continue on. The miracles in the division and being satisfied with what seems to be so small. 22. Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up onto the mountain by himself to pray. Now when evening came, he was alone there, but the boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary. Now in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went to them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It is a ghost." And they cried out for fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Be of good cheer, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him and said, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." So he said, "Come." And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him and said to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Then those who were in the boat came and worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." All right. Any thoughts about that? That's a pretty familiar story. Yes.
It's just interesting to see if this is, I mean, this is the way that it's written, but just seeing all these things that's happening in order, and the disciples are right there experiencing it. And no, we don't know how much time, as far as days or hours or minutes, have gone in between each of these things, but it's almost like they're like, "Oh, you are the Son of God," and then they forget, and then something else happens, and they're like, "Oh, you are the Son of God," and it's like, what? Like, you're right there experiencing it. So, and why would he invite you on the water just for you to drown? Like, where? Why?
Absolutely.
But I guess it's a very human thing. So,
Yeah, exactly.
like, we can't, because I can't say that I would think any different, but just to, see it written, it's like, come on, y'all.
We could say that part of the reason, the obvious point is that the Spirit is with the disciples, but he's not in the disciples yet, not until Pentecost. And you see a change come over them all, especially Peter. He's the most obvious example. Paul too, but he's kind of peripheral to this story. We don't hear about him. But as you said before, as you said also too, it's a thing of that's just human nature in a lot of ways, is that we have to constantly be reminded of things. It's funny that Peter come out and was walking on the water, and when he felt like he was beginning to sink, "Lord, save me." His faith came right back to him then, didn't it? Yeah. How many times when we feel like we're beginning to sink do we call out for God? He was there the whole time. All right. Anybody else? All right. Verse 34. When they had crossed over, they came to the land of Gennesaret, and when the men of that place recognized him, they sent out into all that surrounding region, brought to him all that were sick, and begged him that they might only touch the hem of his garment. And as many as touched it were made perfectly well. So there's another story that supports what Felicia was saying, is that just a little bit, and you can be made full, and you can be made well. Verse 15. All right, we're going to get down into the weeds a little bit on chapter 15. May not read the whole thing, but we're going to read it well. Chapter 15. Then the scribes and Pharisees who were from Jerusalem came to Jesus, saying, Why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread. I'm going to stop right here by way of commentary. Now, when I was a young man and I was in the Baptist church, I was told that these scribes and Pharisees, these Jews, were heckling Jesus' disciples because they were not following the law. That's generally, I think, what's taught in a lot of churches that don't understand God's law. But what these scribes and Pharisees were doing is they were coming against Jesus because he did not follow the tradition of the elders. Okay, what later became compiled into the Talmud, but not at this time. It was called the tradition of the elders at this time. And these were extra laws that were added in to the law of Moses and to the scriptures in order to accomplish various things. Some things it was to keep you from ever approaching even close to breaking a law. Other ways it was ways of finding loopholes around the laws, and then just various things. Anyway, this is not genuine God's law. This is law, commandment, traditions of man, the traditions of the elders. This type of hand washing. And this type of hand washing is not just simply going over to the sink and washing your hands before you eat bread. This is a special type of ritual washing, and it's still done to this day by Orthodox Jews. And what it is they have a cup that has two handles on it. Okay, it's a two-handled cup. And so they take one handle and they'll wash one hand and they'll say a prayer, a special prayer that they're told to say. Then they'll grab that hand now that it's clean and grab the other hand of that, the other handle of that cup, wash the other hand and say a prayer. Now both hands are clean, but you still have to rewash the first hand and make it clean because it touched something that was unclean. Anyway, it gets kind of complicated, but there's special ritual incantations you say, and there's a special prayer you say that begins with Baruch Atah, and then so on and so forth. Anyway, special prayers that they say, and they say them in Hebrew and Aramaic and some other languages. But point is it's a ritual that was added in later. It's not part of God's law. Jesus was not breaking God's law because God's law doesn't say anything about this special type of hand washing that they had come up with in the meantime. So, when they accuse him of that, he comes back in verse 3 and says, he answered and said to them, why do you also transgress the commandment of God because of your tradition? So, he's saying that's not God's law, that's tradition, that's man's law. For God commanded, saying, honor your father and your mother, and he who curses father or mother, let him be put to death. But you say, whoever says to his father or mother, whatever profit you might have received from me is a gift to God. Whoa. Okay, so we are supposed to honor our father and mother no matter what. We're supposed to do it, not because they're good to us, not because we love them. We may, if we have a good relationship, so much the better. But if we have an uneasy relationship with our parents, we still are supposed to honor them. These people are saying that whatever you get from me is a gift from God. If you don't treat me right, then I'm broken from the pledge to honor my father and mother. I don't have to honor them, things like that. No, God says honor them. You are supposed to honor them whether they honor you or not. Okay. Personally, I have an uneasy relationship with certain members of my family, but I still do my best to honor them. So I'm not speaking on something in which I don't have any experience. All right. So, what does he say happens? He says, I'm going to back up just a little bit, but you say, whoever says to his father or mother, whatever profit you might have received from me is a gift to God. This is Korban. This is something I'm not going to get into. We'll talk about it later, I think, but this is called Korban, Korban, if you want to look it up. It's another tradition of the elders. Then he need not honor his father or mother, thus you have made the commandment of God of no effect because of your tradition. The tradition that they have honored, that they have added, has made God's law of none effect. Hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy about you, saying, these people draw near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. All right. Now, if you know me well enough, let's go see where that is in Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 29. Because whenever I have found that whenever a portion of the Old Testament is quoted in the Gospels, you need to go back and read the whole section because there's a lot of context to there that's going to actually enrich your understanding of what's being said there in Matthew. Isaiah chapter 29. We're not going to read the whole chapter. We're just going to read the pertinent part. You really ought to read the whole thing yourself at a later date. But Isaiah chapter 29 and verses 11 through 16. Isaiah is talking about woe to Jerusalem and then blindness coming over the people of Jerusalem. It says, the whole vision has become to me, or has become to you like the words of a book that is sealed, which men deliver to one who is illiterate, saying, read this, please. And he says, I cannot, for it is sealed. Then the book is delivered to one who is literate, saying, read this, please. And he says, I'm not literate. Therefore the Lord said, inasmuch as these people draw near with their mouths and honor me with their lips, this is the part from Matthew, with their lips, but have removed their hearts far from me, and their fear toward me is taught by the commandment of men. Therefore, behold, I will again do a marvelous work among this people, a marvelous work and a wonder, for the wisdom of their wise men shall perish, and the understanding of their prudent men shall be hidden. Woe to those who seek deep to hide their counsel far from the Lord, and their works are in the dark. And they say, who sees us and who knows us? Surely you have things turned around. Shall the potter be esteemed as the clay? For shall the thing made say of him who made it, he did not make me? Or shall the thing formed say of him who formed it, he has no understanding? It's talking specifically about the Messiah and his ministry here, about this great work he's going to perform again. Verse 14, I will do a marvelous work. I will do a marvelous work among this people, a marvelous work and a wonder, for the wisdom of their wise men shall perish. Who would have been considered a wise man at the time of Jesus? The scribes and Pharisees. They're wise men. They're wise men. The wisdom of their wise men shall perish. Their wisdom has perished because of these traditions that they have introduced into the God's one true faith, His one true way of life. They've put all these traditions in there, and they've made it of none effect. They've made it null, and they've made themselves unwise. Has anybody ever read any of the rabbinical literature? Have you ever read any of the rabbinical commentaries on Scripture? I can't remember what it's called right now. Does anybody know what that's called? Midrash? Midrash, yes. If you ever read the Midrash, it's a bunch of people making different commentaries on the Old Testament Scriptures, and they're nonsensical. And I don't mind saying that. You read it, and you know these people don't know what in the world they're talking about. They're coming up with all kinds of fanciful stories. Specifically in Genesis, they talk about Lilith. Anybody familiar with that story? That's from the Midrashic literature. That's from the rabbinical literature. So they don't understand what Genesis means, so they're just going to add this female demon in there, which Adam copulates with because he can't copulate with his wife, and creates demons. Okay, yeah, see the faces you're making. It's the face I made when I read it. Okay? There's all kinds of weird stuff and fanciful flights of just delusion in a lot of that Midrashic literature. That's what Jesus is talking about here, and that's what he's talking about there. The book of Isaiah and the book of Matthew. The whole vision has become, the whole vision, think about that. The whole vision, this is verse 11, chapter 29, Isaiah. The whole vision has become to you like the words of a book that is sealed, which men deliver to one who is literate, saying, read this, please. And he says, I cannot, for it is sealed. They have the ability to read the book, but the meaning of the book is sealed to them. Those rabbis, they had They had the words of the book. They had the words of wisdom. They're literate, but they cannot understand it because it's sealed to them. Why? Because they did not have the Spirit, neither with them nor in them. And they were not called of God into that way of life. So as it is with the church today, you go into any number of the 40, 50,000 Protestant denominations across the world, each teaching some slightly different doctrine, and some of them teaching something crazy that's unfounded completely within the pages of this Bible. Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, any of these churches teach a lot of wacky stuff, okay, such as bowing before Mary, okay? That's wacky according to my Bible. I don't know about yours, you may have a different version. But praying to Mary is wacky, okay? But they do it because the words are sealed to them. They're not understanding the word of God. These people draw near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lip, but their heart is far from me, and in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. Okay. Go back to Matthew and verse 10. Does everybody catch what's being said here, what Jesus is saying to these people? Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do the things that I say to do? Another time Jesus has said that. All right, verse 10. When he had called the multitude to himself, he said to them, hear and understand, not what goes into the mouth defiles a man, but what comes out of the mouth, this defiles a man. Then the disciples came and said to him, do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this saying? But he answered and said, every plant which my heavenly Father has not planted will be uprooted. That's pretty tough talk, right? He's saying these Pharisees were not planted by his Father and they're going to be uprooted. Let them alone. They're blind leaders of the blind, and if the blind leads the blind, both will fall into a ditch. Then Peter answered and said to him, explain this parable to us. So Jesus said, are you also still without understanding? Do you not yet understand whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and is eliminated? Okay, he's talking about washing your hands. Remember back to the beginning of the chapter, he's talking about washing your hands. Whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach is eliminated. But those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile a man. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man. But to eat with unwashed hands does not defile a man. Unwashed hands, okay? I think a lot of you will know where I'm going to direct you to go at this point. Let's go to Mark chapter 7. Mark chapter 7 adds actually a little bit of detail to this. A lot of people, I think, tend to skip Mark. They're like, that's a small gospel. There's not much there. But sometimes these smaller books pack a big punch. And in the case of Mark, it is for sure, because it adds some context here to Matthew chapter 15, a different perspective, maybe we could say. Mark chapter 7, beginning at verse 1. All right. Same situation. Then the Pharisees and some of the scribes came together to him, having come from Jerusalem. And when they saw some of his disciples eat bread with defiled, that is, unwashed hands, they found fault. Same situation. For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands in a special way, holding the tradition of the elders. When they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. And there are many other things which they have received and hold, like the washing of cups, pitchers, copper vessels, and couches. So Matthew gives you a little bit of context about what's going on. He doesn't go into real detail, but he gives you kind of an understanding about what the Pharisees do. Continuing, then the Pharisees and scribes asked him, why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands? He answered and said to them, well did Isaiah prophesy of you, hypocrites, as it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me, and in vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. Okay? For laying aside the commandment of God, you hold the tradition of men, the washing of pitchers and cups, and many other such things you do. He said to them, all too well you reject the commandment of God, that you may keep your tradition. For Moses said, honor your father and your mother, and he who curses father or mother, let him be put to death. But you say, if a man says to his father or mother, whatever profit you might have received from me is korban, remember that term, that is a gift to God, then you no longer let him do anything for his father or mother, making the word of God of no effect through your tradition, which you have handed down, and many such things you do. When he had called all the multitude to himself, he said to them, hear me, everyone, and understand, there is nothing that enters a man from outside which can defile him, but the things which come out of him, those are the things that defile a man. If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. He's still referring to the washing of hands here. When he had entered a house away from the crowd, his disciples asked him concerning the parable. He said to them, are you thus without understanding also? Do you not perceive that whatever enters a man from outside cannot defile him, because it does not enter his heart, but his stomach, and is eliminated, thus purifying all foods? Okay? Now, we've gone over that quite a few times in the past, that particular verse. So let me read that to you in the King James Version. I think it's a little clearer what that is. That's Matthew chapter 7, verse 19. In the King James it says, because it entereth not into his heart, but into the belly. Okay, so this is the food that was eaten with unwashed hands. So it enters not into the heart, but into the belly, and goeth into the draught. Understand toilet, goes into the draught, purging all meats. This word meats is King James English for food. So purging means going to the bathroom. All right, I don't want to get too vulgar about that, but what this is saying is if you eat food with unwashed hands, it's not going to defile your heart. It's not going to defile your spirit, okay? It's going into your stomach and it goes to the toilet. So what does he say after that? He says it's the things that come from the heart, come back up out of the heart, which defile a man, not eating with unwashed hands. Now, a lot of people take this verse and they say this means that Jesus declared all meats clean. You can eat pork and swine. You can dine on shrimp and crabs and shellfish. But that's not what's being said here. It's saying the context of the chapter is of eating with unwashed hands. You can't just magically pry in, thus he declared all meats clean, because that's not what's being talked about. Although a lot of versions of the Bible do try to pry that in there. Anybody have something like a NIV or an NASB or does anybody's Bible read differently or have a parenthesis at the end of the verse?
Well, I don't have it, but I have an NIV study Bible at home, and in parentheses it says, therefore, this makes all meats clean meats. Like they added that in. I'm like, that's not true.
That's kind of sketchy that they would do that, right? Because it's commentary. It's somebody's opinion on that they have added to the Bible verse itself as if that's what the Bible actually says. It's not what it says. It says when you eat basically food with unwashed hands, it goes into the toilet eventually. That's not what makes you unclean. It's what comes from the heart. So if we want to eat that catfish, that comes from the heart, and you're putting that unclean stuff into your body, okay? So that's the difference that we're talking about here, because that is God's law. Washing of hands in a certain ceremonial way is not God's law. That's not going to make you impure or unclean. So did you everybody catch that? Some of the newer versions of Bibles, such as the New International Version, the New Living Translation, the NASB, and there's several others. Even my New King James Version is getting kind of tricky with the language. But a lot of them will have a parenthesis. So if you're ever talking to somebody about clean and unclean meats, they may show you a verse, Matthew chapter 7, 19, that has that written in it. Thus he declared all foods clean, or all meats clean. Okay? That's not in the Bible. That's a commentary that somebody added. It literally reads that the food goes into the belly and then it goes into the toilet from the belly. Yes?
Why is it
catfish unclean?
Because it is a bottom feeder. You understand? You know what catfish eat.
Yeah, I fished them, I eat them.
Hopefully, you're not eating them anymore.
Well, no, I'm not. But
I used to fish them and eat them too until I found out what they were, and then I don't eat them anymore.
why are they unclean? What is it? How could they be? They're an animal. Doesn't their system clean?
No, their system is designed. Foods that God has declared to be unclean are designed usually for one purpose, and that purpose is to clean up the environment. Okay? They're like your vacuum cleaner at your house.
Yeah.
You go and you vacuum, and then at the end, when you're done vacuuming, you don't unzip the bag and dump that into your mouth, do you?
Oh, no.
No. That's what a catfish does. A catfish is like the vacuum cleaner for the bottom of the lake. So yeah, when you cut that catfish open and you eat its flesh,
His body doesn't cleanse.
exactly, it doesn't cleanse the same way. It's full of toxins and a lot of other things, parasites as well. But same thing with shrimp, same thing with pork, same thing with all those other things, crabs, all that stuff. You don't eat them because you don't vacuum your house and then eat what's in the bag. It's the same concept.
The reason I said that was my favorite fish. I didn't know.
That's a catfish or good fish to eat. I'm sure that was juicy.
God designed certain animals, like the chicken with the crow and the cow with the cub, so that all those poisons would not go into the skin of the animal.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why you can eat certain things because the skin is not affected.
Yep, exactly. That's why they don't realize it, but people are addicted to these meats, these unclean meats. Why? Because they have poisons in them that are addictive. Talk to somebody about not eating bacon. I'm serious. You get a lot of pushback on that. Talk to them about not eating catfish or not eating a pork chop or not eating these things. It's because they're addicted to it and they don't even realize they're addicted to it.
That's me.
Yeah, you almost get somebody into a fight sometimes talking to them about this. They just totally cannot understand why you wouldn't eat this stuff.
Yeah, I understand. I know
Yeah.
they're bottom fish. And I just assumed that their body cleansed just like ours does.
Not in the case like your wife was talking about. They have a different digestive system than clean animals, so they retain a lot of the toxins that they eat. And it's a health thing too. I mean, how many people have we got in this room that are of an advanced age and actually in pretty good shape compared to a lot of the other people that are in their same age range? It's because they don't eat that stuff. All right. Oh, matter of fact, I don't want to brag, but I went to the doctor, and I've already told you that. Never mind. First time in a long time that I have had a clean checkup, and it's after I had stopped eating all that stuff for quite a long time. When she first met me, I was in pretty bad shape, and I was eating a lot of that stuff. So that's a testimony to God's way of life and not eating that stuff. Okay, so we talked about the newer versions adding into parentheses what's basically a commentary, somebody's opinion about what that text says. All right, let's go back to Matthew chapter 15, and this is where we'll finish up. We'll look at the second feeding. Matthew chapter 15. And we will start at 21 and we'll finish the chapter out. Then Jesus went out from there and departed to the region of Tyre and Sidon, and behold, a woman of Canaan came from that region and cried out to him, saying, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David, my daughter is severely demon-possessed." But he said to her not a word. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away, for she cries out after us." But he answered and said, "I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." Then she came and worshipped him, saying, "Lord, help me." But he answered and said, "It is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs." And she said again, Yes, Lord, yet even the little dogs eat the crumbs which fall from the master's table. Then Jesus answered and said to her, O woman, great is your faith. Let it to be to you as you desire. And her daughter was healed from that very hour. And Jesus departed from there, skirted the Sea of Galilee, and went up on the mountain and sat down there. Then great multitudes came to him, having with them the lame, blind, mute, maimed, and many others. And they laid them down at Jesus' feet, and he healed them. So the multitude marveled when they saw the mute speaking, the maimed made whole, the lame walking, and the blind seeing, and they glorified the God of Israel. Just more evidence that crumbs from the table. Where have we heard something like that before? Just in this past service. The feeding of the 5,000. Christ divided all that up, and they were filled. Much the same as this Canaanite woman. She showed faith, much like the Roman. She showed faith that Christ could not find in all of Israel. And so she was healed, and or so her daughter was healed. And that should be a sign for all of us that we should be satisfied with the bread of life. All right. Now, this is the last little part, the feeding of the 4,000. How many of you know about the feeding of the 4,000? There's a feeding of the 5,000, 5 loaves, 2 fish. Here we have a feeding of the 4,000. Is this talked about in any of the other Gospels? This one's unique to Matthew. Unique to Matthew. So let's go ahead and read that. Now Jesus called his disciples to himself and said, I have compassion on the multitude because they have now continued with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. And I do not want to send them away hungry lest they faint on the way. Then his disciples said to him, where could we get enough bread in the wilderness to fill such a great multitude? See, they they just saw the 5,000 fed. Now they've got an even smaller group, and they still don't know how to feed them. All right, Jesus said to them, how many loaves do you have? And they said, 7 and a few little fish. So instead of 5 loaves and 2 fish for the 5,000, now we have 7 and 3 for the 4,000. So a little bit smaller of a miracle, but still a miracle nonetheless. So he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves and the fish and gave thanks, broke them, and gave them to his disciples, and the disciples gave to the multitude. So they all ate and were filled, and they took up 7 large baskets full of the fragments that were left. Now those who ate were 4,000 men, besides women and children, so it's actually more than 4,000, probably in much the same way as the 5,000. And he sent away the multitude, got into the boat, and came to the region of Magdala. And that's where we will finish for today. Does anybody have any thoughts or comments about anything that we've read through up to this point? Jesus is the bread of life.
Once again, I find the numbers interesting because it was 5 loaves and 2 fishes.
Mm-hmm.
And this is 7 loaves, which is, we've talked about God being the bread of life.
Mm-hmm.
And 7 is his number.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that the fish are a few little fish,
Mm-hmm.
that even more minuscule amount can take care of many.
Yep. Maybe they were sardines instead of tilapia or something. Whatever's native to that area. But we can be satisfied with Jesus, for he is the true bread of life. And those who eat of that bread shall never hunger and shall have eternal life. I think that's a fitting understanding of those chapters that we have read so far. And even those that eat the breadcrumbs from under the table will be satisfied as well. All right.
Going back to the catfish, it's a funny thing that they have a taste to me
Mm-hmm.
where trout doesn't. have a taste. Now, why is that?
Why do you think that is?
Huh?
Why do you think that is?
Why? Maybe because they eat all that junk. I don't know.
It's because the taste is from all that junk they're eating. It goes into their flesh because they don't have as good of a digestive system.
Yeah.
Trout have a better digestive system, and they eat. They tend to eat like bugs and worms, and I don't know if grains or things like that fall into the water from grasses. They eat that stuff too.
Yeah.
So they eat a better diet than dead things and mud and muck and.
Yeah. I understand it's difficult because I'm the only one that tastes good to me.
Well, see, that's part of the spiritual aspect of this thing, is we don't do things because they feel good all the time,
Right.
and so our world is built around just doing things because they feel good, right?
Right.
Part of the spiritual aspect is learning how to deny ourselves certain things
Yeah.
in order to be obedient to God and live according to His lifestyle.
I understand.
Well, he's doing it.
Oh yeah, I knew he is. I knew he still has these memories and stuff of these things.
Well, actually likes turkey bacon now.
Hmm.
Took him a while to get used to it.
It does. It does. It does.
Something back to the specifics, the fact that it was the number 7, which is God's number,
Mm.
and there's 7 baskets left,
Hmm.
as if no matter how many people are reached and how many people were fed, like the God was not diminished. There was still 7.
And you certainly understand that any way you want to, but the way I read it is He divided it up, and they were satisfied with what He divided up out of
There
that.
was 7 baskets full,
Hmm.
is where, if they still had 7 baskets full.
And I like that there's always something left over. So
Mhm.
even though it starts out with not
Uh-huh.
even close to being enough, there's still something left
Yep.
over.
And that's a great detail. Dee Dee, I'll come back to you, Tom.
I don't think anybody said this, but I think that as they passed it out, it kept multiplying. I mean, think about it. He did not put. Where would they have put all the fish and the bread? That's a huge amount to feed. What, maybe 8 or 10,000 people?
Hmm. I think you were out when I directed everybody to the part in Mark where it says He took 2 fish and divided them.
Yeah.
I think that the miracle was in being satisfied with so little. I don't think that He raised it up and then came back down with
Yeah,
tons of
that's
fish.
possible because he can do all things.
Well, I think he multiplied those.
You're absolutely welcome to that. And there's people that believe that. And a lot of the
It's
movies and stuff
the only way you could do it. You had to multiply.
in the physical realm, that's the only way you could do it.
Yeah.
But remember, there's a spiritual aspect to it too,
Well, yeah, it's all about Jesus doing what he does.
because He's the bread of life. And even a few little crumbs from the table, the Canaanite woman, was satisfied as well. That's the way I look at it. But you're absolutely welcome to look at it anyway.
I've heard the story, and that's probably most of you experienced it. You invite 10 people to your house and 20 them, and you're cooking spaghetti,
Mm-hmm.
and you keep dipping it, and you never run out. So it's got to be multiplied in your pot for you to be able to divide.
It's a good way of looking at it too. Tom, did you have something?
Well, everybody looks at the bread and the fish and being a miracle. A question that I heard mentioned long ago. So where'd the 12 baskets come from?
Did they multiply too?
6 loaves of bread and 2 little fish. If you had a basket for the 2 little fish and the 6 loaves of bread, that's 7. You got 5 baskets that came from somewhere.
Maybe they had some empty baskets on hand.
I guess just to go off that,
Mhm.
I never even thought of them having a basket. I thought that they're taking little pieces and handing it these little pieces. They consume it and they are full.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking it's from hand to hand.
Mm-hmm.
We know that there were baskets that the original fish and, bread was in, but when he gave it to them, he broke it with his hand, put it in their hands, and they went and broke it from the little bitty pieces. That's how I was thinking of it.
Mm-hmm.
Only based on what is actually said instead of trying
Right.
to add words. But
It's miraculous. One way or the other, it's miraculous. Yes.
I'll say one
yeah.
more thing. Someday we'll be able to ask them.
Yeah. How did you do it, Lord?
How you do that, huh?
How you do that?
Oh, ye of little faith. That's what he'll say to us too.
Do. Very fit.
All right. Well, if that's it, then we'll wrap up.
Yeah.